Metropolitan Council. It is Wednesday, May 8th, and I'm calling the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted. I forgot to ask how everybody's doing. Everybody doing okay? The rain is kind of something, isn't it, out there to get through? And we haven't had any in a while, so good. And the next thing will be the approval of the minutes. The approval of the minutes from the April 24th meeting. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. Next, we have our public invitation. So this is an invitation to interested persons to address the council on matters not on the agenda. Public comment on the agenda items has occurred in the respective committees, and usually we would allow a 3-minute presentation. So I'm going to ask Liz if there's anybody that signed up.
No.
No. Okay. And is there anybody out there that wanted to speak? Just checking. Okay. Then we, at this point in the meeting, we are going to go on to our next item, which are our consent agenda. Items under the consent agenda will be enacted by one motion with no separate discussion. Discussion on the item as desired. The item will be removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Approval of the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and the motion carried. Thank you. Reports of standing committees. First, we have community development. No report. Thank you. Environment. I think the reports are on the consent agenda. Next, we'll hear from the standing committees. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one business item on the agenda, business item 2019-81, award general obligation debt within established financial parameters. Typically, once a year, we issue debt for Metro Transit based on the estimated 12 to 18-month cash flow needs in the capital budget. This year's bond issues are $72.3 million for general obligation transit bonds and $44.7 million for general obligation transit Haywood Garage bonds. The debt service for the transit bonds is paid with property tax levies. We are selling the bonds on May 22nd with the proceeds in hand by mid-June. Staff fully expects the sale of these bonds to fall within the parameters set, with the interest rates possibly coming in up to a full % underneath the parameters. This item has been reviewed and approved by the Management Committee. With that, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached parameters resolution 2019-4, 2019-5, authorizing the issuance, sale, and award of general obligation debt, the issuance of related issuance expenses, and execution of the necessary documents to secure this financing.
Second.
Thank you. So there is a motion and it has been seconded for item 2019-81. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-78 is for approving a contract for Bass Lake Spur Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair. The council acquired the 6.8-mile Bass Lake Spur in 2018 for the Southwest LRT project, and the council is responsible for inspection, maintenance, repair, flagging, and dispatch activities within this corridor. The Bass Lake Spur is divided into two segments, east and west. For the east portion, London McGraw Joint Ventures will be responsible for maintenance and repair until the civil construction contract ends. For the west portion, Canadian Pacific will be responsible for maintenance and repair until June 30th, 2019. This contract will be responsible for freight rail maintenance and repair on the west portion beginning July 1st, 2019, and the east portion once Southwest LRT civil construction ends, and will continue on both portions until Southwest LRT begins revenue service in 2023. Dispatching services for the Bass Lake Spur will be performed under a separate contract. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 18P387 Bass Lake Spur Freight Maintenance or Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair with North Shore Track Services Incorporated in the amount of its low responsible bid of $1,530,433.64. The term of the contract is 5 years.
There is a motion on 29-78. Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have advisory committee recruitment. We have 6 business items on the agenda addressing appointments to the Metropolitan Council advisory committees. Items 2019-99, 100, 101, 102, 106, and 107. These 6 business items cover 27 openings due to term expirations and vacancies on 6 audit committees. 6 committees, including the Audit Committee, the Investment Review Committee, the Livable Communities Advisory Committee, the Transportation Advisory Board, the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, and the Equity Advisory Committee. So our advisory committees and their members make up a crucial part of the work of the Metropolitan Council does. We are an important piece in shaping policy in the region. The Council has been recruiting for candidates via partner community organizations and professional organizations since the beginning of the year. We've had over 150 individuals apply for 27 openings. The quality of the candidates and the passion for the work we do here at the Council has been incredible. Each advisory committee had a nominating committee made up of council members, and in some instances, council staff, partner organizations, and current committee members. Nearly every council member served on a nominating committee or 2. I know this was a huge lift for many of you and a large time commitment by council members, staff, and community partners. So I really want to thank you all for your hard work. I know it's really a crunch. It's kind of reminds me when we're recruiting all of you, so we know what that's like, right? You had the difficult task of reviewing applications, interviewing candidates, and making recommendations. I would say the difference is, of course, the governor makes decisions on the final ones for that one. As the chair of the Metropolitan Council, I'm excited to accept the recommendations of the nominating committees for appointments to these 6 committees. So as far as the appointments, the 27 new appointees are listed on each individual business item. Also, descriptions of each committee are in the business items and on the council website. So if you're watching in the audience or remotely, you can see the names there and on the website. Under other business item numbers 2019-99, 100, 101, 102, 106, and 107 are my recommendations for appointments to the Audit Committee, Investment Review Committee, Livable Communities Advisory Committee, Transportation Advisory Board, Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, and the Equity Advisory Committee. Unless a council member would like to discuss any of these recommendations individually or has a question, I would entertain a motion to move these advisory committee appointment recommendations. Are there any questions? Anybody? Councilmember Johnson.
I would move the recommendations, Madam Chair.
Second.
Is there a second? Okay, good. So it has been moved and seconded, a motion to accept the advisory committee members as nominated. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
To Councilmember Lee and then Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was on 2 of these committees, and I think I speak for all of us members who are on committees, but we took our jobs very seriously. Some nights we're here from 5 to 10 to 11 p.m., and that's because we had a great pool of candidates, and they were very serious candidates, and they were amazing, great people, and it's humbling and it's an honor to consider the many great folks in our communities that want to have input into our public bodies.
Excellent. Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just really want to underscore what Councilmember Lee just said and really lift up the quality and the caliber of the applicants. And I participated in Little Communities Advisory Committee interviews. I think it was difficult to make a choice. And then the ones that we did not recommend to you for appointment, we were very we encourage staff to continue to engage these individuals and see if there may be some other way they can serve the council. But it was just such an impressive pool of candidates.
Great, and that is really great to hear, right? Because we need to continue to keep people interested in the Metropolitan Council. I think if you're like me, you get out there and someone's like, what does the Met Council do, right? And so the more we can talk about it and get people involved, it helps. Councilmember Johnson.
I would just echo all of that. I really appreciate all of staff support in this as well. And I want to give Katie Driscoll a shout out. She was amazing. I know in the 4 nights I was doing this, she was there prepping.
Katie.
So it's a team effort, and everybody who pitched in, I think it was really rewarding and humbling.
Excellent. Anything else? Okay, great. And thanks again to everybody. That's these heavy lifts don't come that often, or this type of thing, and it's really exciting to see how it went. Great. Well, last we're already to.
We should vote.
Did we take the vote? We need to vote. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion carried. Thank you. Sometimes I get lost in the business. Now, other business. So we've done the other business, and now we're down to our 2 information items presented by Kathy Tenbrook and Wes Koistra. So if they want to come forward and welcome Kathy and Wes. These 2 informational items, I'll just introduce them as they're coming up. The first one's going to be the Interagency Council on Homelessness. Kathy Tenbrook is the state director. And the second would be the update on the proposed Green Line schedule adjustment. Wes Koistra is the general manager of Metro Transit. Welcome. I think you're going to do somewhat of an interactive presentation. So I think Kathy's going to start.
I'll wrestle you to start.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and council members. Thanks for inviting me to join you today. It's nice to see lots of familiar faces around the table. I am here to just talk a little bit about the state of Minnesota's Interagency Council on Homelessness. And I don't know how familiar this body is with the council, but I'll just give a very brief update on what that is and how it's working, but then dive a little bit more deeply into what we are seeing in terms of some of the trend lines, especially as they relate to people who are sleeping outside, on transit, and in places not fit for human habitation, as I know that's an important topic for all of you as well. As the chair mentioned, my name is Kathy Tenbrook. I'm the state's director to prevent and end homelessness. And in that role, I manage a small interagency team made up of staff from 11 different state agencies that are helping to support the Interagency Council, which is the commissioners of 11 state agencies, the chair of the Met Council, and the Lieutenant Governor. And the Lieutenant Governor leads that council. Our charge is to really work across the cabinet to see the ways that all of those agencies can help support the vision of preventing and ending homelessness in Minnesota and providing housing stability for all Minnesotans. So I have the most recent iteration of our statewide plan right here, and they're over there on the table if anybody's interested in seeing it. It really lays out, if you're interested, the vision, which is, of course, is the housing stability for all Minnesotans, but also the specific goals that we have around ending veteran homelessness, homelessness for people with disabilities, homelessness among young people and families and children, and the strategies and principles and practices that we need to take as state agencies, but also what we're doing in partnership with broader community partners across the state as well. I'm really delighted that this work is being led by the Lieutenant Governor, and she has asked our Housing Commissioner and our Human Services Commissioner to also co-chair that effort with her. And we've only had one meeting of this administration, but I'm encouraged that the commitment is clearly very strong to not only continue this work, but really take it to the next level and really also hone in how we are doing as it relates to equity across all of the goals and all of the actions we are taking. So new tasks at hand to look at our data and disaggregate it and everything we're doing to make sure we're having an impact equitably across our populations. Really quickly, and since I know you don't have time to read this all right now, I will tell you briefly kind of what the definition is of preventing and ending homelessness. We do not mean that to be successful, we have prevented every possible housing crisis from ever happening. What we do mean is that when there is a housing crisis, we want to have systems in place that can prevent that housing crisis from leading to homelessness whenever possible. And if somebody, an individual or a family, does become homeless, we want to quickly respond, get them back connected to housing that's stable, and then provide whatever kinds of services and supports they need to sustain that housing. And if we do that across an entire system, in other words, prevent it or make it rare, brief, and one time, is kind of how we summarize that, then we believe we're successful at preventing and ending homelessness across the board. We've had areas of great success since we launched this cabinet level interagency council in 2014 under the last administration. You may have heard we are really on the brink of ending veteran homelessness in the state, which is a remarkable feat given our housing vacancy rates and affordability issues, as you all know better than anybody. And so it's been a lot of really remarkable targeted work on veterans. And the governor has announced he wants to be the 4th state in the nation to hit that goal. We've also made great progress on family and children homelessness, where we've actually seen that trend line going in the right direction, which once again is because of a lot of very focused, targeted work by great community partners and providers and state resources to go to those families, given the housing situation that we have in this state. But areas where we have not seen success include people who are sleeping outside. That number of people, not just in the metro area, really all across the state of Minnesota, and frankly, all across the country, has been climbing steadily for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's really reaching, as you all know, a significant peak in our communities. I just got today the most recent point in time count data, which isn't fully public yet. But what I can tell you, if we do a count every January throughout the whole state, is that the number is still going up. So we are seeing the number of people who are unsheltered, sleeping in cars, sleeping outside, encampments, transit, or places unfit for human habitation still rising. And a lot of those folks have chronic disabilities and issues that make it even more difficult to access the housing and supports that they need. This is, of course, driven, as you all know, by not only the housing affordability issues that we see, but also ensuring that we have the kinds of housing that really work for people who are currently sleeping outside, which mean they often have to have lower barriers to access, maybe some more supports attached to help support people stay in that housing and be successful in that housing. And so there's a lot more creativity and focus we need to take to make sure we can do that. Due to, I actually don't want to move on from this topic really quickly, the disparities, and once again, I know you all know this very well, but I think it's really important to always talk about this. While disparities in homelessness among communities of color are vast, among people who are sleeping outside, they are even greater. So for example, we have 13 times the number of American Indian people who are experiencing homelessness, period, than we would expect, given their representation in the general population. Among people sleeping outside, that goes up to 27 times the number of American Indians we should expect. And so the disparity is just huge, which means that we also want to make sure we're using that lens across everything we're looking to do, the solutions we want to take, and working with community to help figure out what those are. In response to the growing numbers of people sleeping outside, and certainly as it relates to what we saw last summer in both St. Paul and in Minneapolis, my office took on the role of just helping to facilitate a regional conversation of community partners at both the ground level, where we have outreach workers and housing and service providers and people with lived experience of homelessness themselves, law enforcement, partners across all of those sectors, working together to come up with solutions and recommendations for those solutions. And also what we call a public sector leadership team, which includes your chair and other members of the council who have been worn different hats and been at that table as well, that have looked at the recommendations coming from that group. And the public sector leader group includes mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul and folks from the Regional Council of Mayors. It includes our 7 county area county managers and some county commissioners and Councilmember Robert Lilligren representing NACD, and includes state agency commissioners, and the lieutenant governor is also leading that work. And so there's a lot of energy and buy-in there. The design team came up with some very clear, specific recommendations that we can take to systemically look at how we're addressing people who are sleeping outside and change that trajectory. They brought that to the public sector leaders. The leaders said, yes, this looks directionally sound. We are going to work to try to implement some of these actions. Some of them are going to take a while to really implement in a significant way so that we can see results. And so our current tactic is to work with our members of that on the ground team that we call the design team and really figure out an acceleration plan. How can we make sure that right now, this summer, people using transit as a form of shelter, people who are sleeping outside, people who are sleeping in their cars, that we can start to address the needs urgently so that we can hopefully start to turn that tide this summer. We don't think that we can solve it in a couple of months by any means. We do think there are multiple ideas and strategies, if we have the political and community will to take on, that we can start to see some success, like we've seen on veteran homelessness, like we've seen on family and children homelessness. So those recommendations fall in categories of, what should we do around outreach? What do we need to do to ensure access to shelter and crisis response? What do we need to do to make sure that what is available has culturally specific resources attached when needed? How do we make sure that the housing we're creating is low barrier enough and supportive enough to really work for people who are sleeping outside? And how do all of our partners across the 7-county region do all of this in a way that's actually consistent and with each other? So our law enforcement is responding in similar ways, whether somebody's in St. Paul or Minneapolis or Anoka. And so we're really working with all those partners. And as you can imagine, it's quite an undertaking, but we do have a real sense of those communities wanting to address this issue together and trying to figure out what kind of a regional process we can really, so they can support and commit to do this on an ongoing basis. I've been in conversations with Wes and Meredith about the role that the Met Council and Metro Transit could play in such an acceleration plan. And I think those conversations have been really encouraging and really supportive. One option that we've explored is increasing the number of housing case managers that are really working with and targeting people who are utilizing the transit system right now who need connection to housing and potentially some support services, working with our outreach teams to do that work together. That's something that especially if it's targeting people who have some form of a disability, can really unlock state housing support dollars for those folks in ways that are unlimited and are ongoing for those individuals. So we're really looking at some creative ways of leveraging those dollars and targeting them to people quickly and getting those resources out on the ground. And that's just, one example. A couple of other things we're trying to do immediately is keep some of our existing shelter capacity open. There are some places that have been open for kind of winter-only spaces. And we've worked, for example, Ramsey County has recently announced that they are going to actually reopen what was a winter-only shelter and make it a shelter throughout the year up until next winter. And certainly they'll assess as they go. But making sure that we didn't lose the capacity of those 65 beds and potentially adding to those as well. So we're looking for some additional capacity in the system as well. No one strategy, the case managers, the shelter piece, no one strategy alone is going to be enough to get us to what we need. But we're in conversations with multiple partners about multiple pieces of what an acceleration strategy could look like. And so I just wanted to say that, while it's certainly true that the light rail has absolutely been what so many people have seen as a safer place for a nighttime refuge and respite, I don't think anybody believes that the light rail is a dignified, appropriate response to people's needs in terms of housing and supports. And so I think we all want to work together quickly to make sure that we can provide the right kinds of responses to folks as best we can. And I think the worry out there, of course, is that we don't have enough viable options that really work for people now. And that is a very real concern. And so I think, while once again, you all have important decisions and parts of this story, you're not alone. There are many other leaders and partners that have a role to play. And I think it's trying to pull all of those strings at the same time to see if we can really serve folks better and in a more dignified way. It's going to need more resources from the legislature this session. There are some resources on the table, if approved, that could make a very big difference for this population. More collaboration across all the counties and sectors, increased philanthropic investment, and some of our state agencies and partners really being as strategic with their existing resources to serve the folks that are sleeping outside now in more effective ways. And so looking at all of those pieces together. So thank you for your part in this, working on the solutions and your partnership that you've shown. I certainly have been really encouraged by working with your chair and your staff, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you about what we're doing, and happy to answer questions, but I'll let Wes take his turn.
Mr. Forster?
Madam Chair and members, my primary role tonight is to report back to you on some of the activities that we've done over the month of April after our original discussion of the issue of closing Green Line service that we had with you at an early April Committee of the Whole meeting. I do want to thank Kathy and the Interagency Council and the design teams that she mentioned for their support of the work that needs to get done to provide services that are really can offer meaningful change to people's lives, and services that we certainly don't have available on transit, but certainly we recognize that people using transit as shelter need. And as we talk a little bit more about the survey that we had, and having participated in that survey, you see it firsthand. The significant needs of people who are using transit as shelter, and I know the significant needs of people who are without shelter in general. And I think that's the purpose here, is how do we connect people with services that really improve lives and provide meaning. And we've worked with Kathy certainly more rigorously lately, but before that through our HAT team, and I know that Terry Smith has worked with you on an ongoing basis with respect to the housing vouchers we have and the other coordination of this work that we're doing. And you've been supportive with that, and I really do appreciate that assistance and that support. They're doing the work that connects people to meaningful change, and that's what we need. In April, we shared with you that Metro Transit's considering changing weekday Green Line hours in order to more timely and provide more timely and safer opportunities for rail signal and route technology maintenance, have more time between vehicles. And we also shared our concerns about being unable to provide a safe environment for both our destination riders and people using transit as shelter, given the situation in the middle of the night that we are seeing occurring on the train. The proposed changes, as a reminder, are to eliminate Green Line service between 2 and 4 a.m. That means that results in the elimination of 2 east-west trips and 2 west-to-east trips for that line. We are now, you had asked us to look at the possibility of replacement service, bus service, and I'm coming back with information that says we've looked at that, and we would include replacement bus service as part of that change. So we originally represented this as a 1.5% change in Green Line service hours. And now with the replacement bus service, there's no net reduction in service hours. There is a change in service mode from light rail to bus. You also asked us to review some of the peer practices with respect to 24-hour service. We contacted 36 of the largest transit agencies in the United States. 22 of those agencies run light rail. Of the 22 that run light rail, there's only one other provider, that's Los Angeles, that provides 24-hour services on weekdays. There are some that provide 24-hour services on weekends, as we will under this proposal, but many of those transit agencies do not provide even 24-hour service on weekends. They're surprised that we do provide 24-hour service on weekdays. We're clearly the outlier, and they think that between maintenance needs and the fact they believe bus can provide a better service, that they see bus as the best alternative during those hours. With respect to specifically the overnight rider survey, as we discussed in April, the purpose of the survey was to better understand travel needs and practices of people riding between the hours of 1 a.m. 4 a.m. We surveyed between 1 a.m. 4 a.m. The proposed reduction in services is between 2 and 4 a.m. The method was onboard surveys across 3 separate nights, or mornings, however you want to describe them. We surveyed between 1 and 4 a.m. on Monday, 1 and 4 a.m. on, at least attempted to on Tuesday, and we also surveyed between 1 and 4 a.m. on a Thursday early morning. About 270 surveys were started. We had, in the end, for reasons I'll explain a little bit later, or I can explain now, that we had 152 completed surveys. We found that when we came on board that the idea was to use Survey Monkey on our phones, and it just wasn't a practical way to do it because these surveys had to be done through discussions. It didn't lend themselves to recording the information on phones. So we had alternative paper surveys, but in some of those cases, the times and locations of the surveys were not recorded. So that's the difference between the 270 and 152 surveys that we'll be focusing on. We had 18 staff conducting surveys across those 3 nights. This included Metro Transit staff from Metro Transit staff from community outreach and engagement, the equity and inclusion unit of Metro Transit, strategic initiative staff, service development, Metro Transit, police department, and a handful of other staff. I participated in the early Monday morning AM survey. We did not run into language barriers, but in case we did, we made sure to have staff proficient in Spanish, Hmong, Somali as part of the teams each night. We also have translated our paper surveys into Spanish, Somali, Oromo, Hmong, and Vietnamese. So we were prepared for it based upon the briefing that we had among all the surveyors after the last night. No one ran into language barrier issues on the survey. From my own experience, it was not, I will not call this an ideal research environment. There was a lot of duplication and count. So when I show you the graph, you'll see counts, but those counts are likely duplicated because we found that there was a lot of passenger movement between one car to another car, or even between trains, where trains were happened to be stopped at the same station at the same time. We would see passengers go off that train and then go on to the other train, going the opposite direction. The extent of this was somewhat of a surprise to us. We assumed there was some migration from train car to car, but it was extensive and it really created duplicate counts. And then on the first 2 nights of the surveys, where we had plainclothes officers on the cars, we couldn't complete the 3 a.m. survey on either early Monday morning or early Tuesday morning because there was a fight that broke out one of the evenings, and there was another issue that came up that required arrest work from the police officers, and they asked us not to complete the 3 o'clock survey. They didn't feel it was safe for us to stay on the cars at that time, and asked us to, because they had to leave the car to administer the arrest. They had asked us to leave the car. It was different on the Thursday evening because the police officers asked to again be uniformed. They felt it was safer for them, safer for us, and it changed the environment considerably in that there was less people getting on the cars. There were more individuals looking in, and when you see uniformed officers staying off, and it just changed by reports of people who were on all 3 survey nights, which some did. said that it was a significant difference when we had uniformed police officers on the trains versus plainclothes police officers. The reason we went with plainclothes police officers originally was we didn't want to skew the survey, so we had to choose safety on the third night over what would be a better situation for research. Still, we thought we received again, going back to our original purpose, which was to find out the information we needed to know about what the travel behavior was and what the demand for alternative service was. We think the surveys provided really valuable information in that regard, and information that we can act on. And as I've already indicated to you, that we made the decision that if we go forward with this, that the survey, that the replacement bus service will be provided. This is the chart showing the green line overnight surveys. This is the representing all 3 nights. In reviewing this, let me first point out that the 117 trip, the bottom axis, the horizontal axis, is the hours of the trip. So you see a 117 hour, a 217, and a 317. The 117 hour is not the service that we would eliminate. We'd be only eliminating the second 2 bars represented for both the east and for the westbound surveys. Of the 152 surveys we completed, I believe it was just over 82, I think, surveys were represented in the 217 route and in the 317 route. The gray bar on this chart represents those who were not surveyed, and those would either be individuals who were sleeping, because we made a determination we were not going to wake people who were sleeping on the trains, or they were people who refused to engage in the survey. I can say through my observation when I was on the train, and through the observations of others when we met to debrief, almost all the individuals who refused to survey were either individuals that were homeless or using the train itself as recreation. And the way we concluded that is to see that they went from end to end, started back again on the train. So they were riding the train from one end to the other end, and then starting to return the other direction. So that's not part of the survey data, but I just want to say that by and large, the people representing the gray box were people either without shelter or using transit as their destination. The green box represents those individuals that were surveyed and identified themselves as using transit as shelter. The purple area represents people using transit for social recreational purposes. For the most part, this was again people that were traveling from end to end on the line, said they were not using it for shelter, but they were using it as their destination location to socialize and to interact with others. The remaining bars are for transit, for work, shopping, and school. The light orange is for work. The shopping is the yellow, and school is, I believe, it's a darker blue on there. But there wasn't, at that time, there's not much of that. The overall impressions that we were left with is the total rider count is much less than anticipated. We were looking at total rider counts that were based upon our automated count system, and that counts people in an automated way that go in and out the door. And we found that because of the migration between cars or people looking in and coming back out of the doors, or people moving from train to train, that there was a lot of duplication in our overnight rider counts that were automated. In this case, we found that overall counts were less than we anticipated of ridership, and we found all categories of counts were less than anticipated. There were less people who were using transit as shelter than we anticipated, even if you consider the entirety of the gray bar as people needing shelter. were less than anticipated. The people using transit as a mobility service to get to work, to shopping, or to school were much less than anticipated. The 117 hour of service, which is the service that's going to remain, is probably has the greatest use of transit as a mobility service. You had asked us to survey race or ethnicity, and we added that to the survey upon that request. And the survey showed that 48% of the individuals surveyed most people, I will say, were willing to provide that information to us by and large. 48% of the individuals surveyed were identified as Black or African American, 24% white or Caucasian, 9% as of multiple ethnicity or race, and 3% Asian and 3% Hispanic, with 2.5% American Indian. So it was primarily, by almost half of the individuals on the trains at that during the survey nights were Black or African American. And I would say that in my observation of those that didn't answer the survey that would not be represented in this count, most of those persons were people of color as well. So it's predominant, matches what Kathy mentioned as the disparity in people who are homeless. That disparity was well represented on our trains. Again, our purpose of the survey was to better understand our riders' travel practices. You had also asked about surveying the needs of people who are using transit as shelter, and we spoke with Kathy about that, and I think there was conversations. I know there was conversations with Wilder about that, and I think the conclusion was that we have a really comprehensive survey of people who are homeless from the 2018, the homelessness survey of 2018, that money would be better spent on digging deeper into that survey. I believe that survey has over 100 questions in it. So there's a wealth of information that they haven't been able to look more closely at. And if our purpose is to get at what are the particular needs of people who are using transit as shelter, what sort of ways can we best serve those needs, it was felt it would be better to invest in looking more deeply into the survey information that they already had, because there's already been significant surveys done of these individuals. So we are doing that. We're in the process of doing that. I don't know if the contract with Wilder is complete, but it's in process and it's all but complete. And we are providing them with funds to dig deeper, and we'll have to have further conversations of what areas are best to look at closer. And we'll be talking with Kathy, since this is really more to inform the work of people who are finding the meaningful services and connecting people to those services. So we want to make sure that we're coordinating with the design team and with Kathy and her staff in terms of what are the best questions to dig deeper into that would be beneficial for that purpose. So we think that the deeper, wilder survey look will really inform the transition planning efforts that we want to support and that are important to our riders. We also, during April, had presentations to the Equity Advisory Committee and to the Unsheltered Design Team. There are council members here. Councilmember Gonzalez is a co-chair of that committee that were there, and by and large, I will say the feedback was that this was a difficult time to be doing this, that there was opposition to it among those committee members. Some were very pointed about the timing of this. Others expressed concerns that we're trying to address with respect to alternative bus service and with respect to how we connect what will happen to people who are using transit as shelter, which we're also trying to address in our work with the Interagency Council and in our work with Wilder, and our desire to support the resourcing of 10 case managers to help with the transition needs of the people on our trains. I don't know. I would leave it up. I don't want to misrepresent that meeting. So I don't know if I misrepresented. I invite people to say more specifically. But I would not. I would certainly not say that the Equity Advisory Committee supported the change. We spoke with the unsheltered design team, had a chance to present what we were considering, and I would depict that conversation as more how do we get on with it? How do we get on to providing a better service to people who are homeless? How do we create activity and strategy to serve people's needs? There was one person that felt she wrote an editorial that felt that we should announce the decision right away because it felt like it could be leveraged to influence legislator response to this. But there was not, in my recollection, any pushback on doing it. It was more push forward on what we do about it. And again, council member was there as well, so I invite any addition to that depiction. We're continuing with the HAT efforts and Metro HRA efforts, and those will continue regardless of where we go with this. We're coordinating transit, starting to coordinate inside what those transit service changes would look like, including the replacement bus plan. We are looking to, as I mentioned, to fund additional data analysis to understand the needs of people using transit as shelter, and we are hoping to fund additional case managers. And I say hope because it may be at a level of cost where that would come to you as a business item. And with your support, we want to fund additional case managers that will work with individuals, connect them to services and housing. As Kathy mentioned, we would want to fund them in a transitional period of about 6 months, but under certain state plan structures and state funding structures. If you develop a caseload, they can be self-supporting and continue on. I think you mentioned a caseload of about 15 each, and there's Department of Human Services programs. So really, the seed money is important to get that work started, and then it can be self-sustaining at the end. So it's just not seed work for the transition. It can be seed work. Seed funding for an ongoing effort that goes beyond the need for transit transition of people who are using transit as shelter. And so in summary, I think the major changes, the information we received didn't really change the impression that we had that we brought to you in early April. The major changes that we've made since then has been to commit to an alternative bus service, so that we're not really reducing service hours, we're just reducing the mode of service, and also to provide as much support to Kathy and the design team and the providers of service through more survey information and through the funding case managers who can connect people to alternative services. And I'll open for questions.
Okay, thank you. So, Council, we've had a presentation. We'll take questions. We have a list, so add Councilmember Chambliss to that. So, Councilmember Bento, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Councilmember Chambliss. So, Councilmember Bento?
I have one question and then a brief comment. Wes, when, you might have said this and I missed it. When did the surveying occur? Do you remember which week that was?
The week of April 15th, I'm being told by a friendly face in the crowd.
Week of April
15th.
Okay, I'm sitting here listening to this and thinking about today's weather and wondering what the weather was like that week, but I have no recollection at all. So.
Oh, it was not summer yet, but it was
Okay.
not winter either.
Okay.
And I think that that's a fair question
Yeah.
in terms of the numbers of people. And I should have mentioned that when I mentioned that the total numbers were less than we were expecting. Although we're also told that sometimes the summer counts can be higher. So I do think the weather question is a fair question to ask. I'm not sure to what extent, what power that has on the number of people that are riding the train.
And I think as Minnesotans, excuse me, Madam Chair, I think as Minnesotans, we have a tendency to start celebrating spring as soon as it gets above 40. So it doesn't take much for us to think spring. The comment I'd like to make is the other day, along with the chair and a number of the staff from the Met Council, I attended a meeting on community prosperity for people with disabilities. And one of the participants in the meeting made a statement that I wrote down because I was so struck by it. She said, none of us is guaranteed we're going to wake up with the same capacity. And her reference and use of the word capacity had to do with physical abilities. But as I was listening to this, I kept thinking of financial capacity and support system capacity and the fact that we have a lot of people in our community who are watching this conversation and other conversations around homelessness who are concerned for people who are currently homeless, but they're also concerned for themselves and their families. And so my hope is, and I see this conversation as having some silver lining to it. It's forced us to get really intense and introspective. And my hope is that going forward, we'll continue to keep having these conversations. I know that homelessness is not a main part of the council's duties, but certainly we have a very direct relationship with it, and I just hope we can keep our efforts going. It was a hot topic yesterday in a meeting that our chair had with the Ramsey County Commissioners. They are also very committed to and concerned about homelessness. So I thank you both. I really appreciate what I've learned here today.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
So I think, thank you, Chair. A couple of things that I just wanted to share and encourage us to think around is one, what I've heard most as a part of this is that people want us to do our work better. And this is really about our work in transit service. And the concerns were really around how this decision got rolled out. What's the role of this body or other bodies in being a part of that decision making, and transparency around why we're making the decisions. And I think I'd like to just acknowledge we could do better. We could have done better, and we need to do better going forward. It's just had lots of conversations with different staff and at this table and different amalgamations, and I just want to say that we need to hear that and learn from that. So some of the ideas that have come up in those conversations are things like when we decide we're going to do a pilot of something as a part of a project, can we develop an MOU with the community organizations we're working with at the time to outline the nature and scope of that pilot? So we define things like what is the assessment plan at the end of that pilot when we're going to assess it, and how do we make decisions as a part of that. So it's not a surprise to the community. So it's not us reminding you, hey, remember, this was just a pilot anyways. If we can create some innovations around this that will prevent us from getting into the situation again by saying, if we're going to pilot something, let's create an agreement about what that's going to look like and how we're going to measure that, so that it's not a surprise and community feels like we're trusted in that relationship with each other. The other thing we talked about is in the context of the surveys, could we include some of our community organizations who have concerns about this service change in going out with us and a part of that? So I'd really encourage us to not just do it ourselves, but invite them along with. Invite them to be partners in that work. so that they can see, understand, touch, and feel the issues too, and lend their expertise and knowledge, as well as council or committee members or commission members from the various groups, to helping us solve these issues. Those are some things that I'd like to see us employ as we look at this. In addition, there was a piece that I believe came out today talking about this policy, how the policy may not be what the community expects from us. So how do we make sure in cases like this where the community would like to have a voice? I remember in one of our meetings with Councilmember Friedson saying really eloquently, how do we have this conversation with our constituents? How do they get to have a voice in this? Because they want one. So those would be some of the things that I hope we can, I'm not going to call them a silver lining, but I think how do we learn from this and get better and improve past this. The last thing I'd like to say, Chair, is I did hear from 2 organizations that work with teenagers who expressed their concerns around the service change. And I noticed we didn't talk about age and the demographics. And so I'm curious if that information was collected. And if not, I would encourage us to not make assumptions of people based on their appearances, but go out and connect with communities that are working with that population. As we know, they tend to be an invisible group in the homeless conversation. We have a lot of invisible groups in that conversation, but that's one too. I don't want us to lose sight of. Thank you.
Madam Chair, first of all, we did not ask the age, so we don't have that information. And I'll just say generally that I think I agree with a lot of the issues that Councilman Retson raises in terms of this. This does raise some policy questions about how we engage our communities in decisions we make, and at what point do we engage our communities in those decisions, and are we engaging communities in operational decisions, or engaging communities in policy decisions? And maybe it's not as clean as between one or the other, but I think having a general policy that talks about engagement, because this was a situation where the reason it was brought forward to the council is because we understood that there'd be a lot of interest in it, even though it didn't meet the criteria to bring it forward. And we make decisions every day that impact people's lives in one way or another. And so, I would invite clearer direction on what the appropriate level in terms of community engagement would be, and where we begin it, and where we feel like it's not the right thing to do, where we feel like it's the absolute necessary thing to do. And agree wholeheartedly with the points that you're making about that's the question. I think that it really is left with the council.
Olive? Okay, well, one thing I just encourage, because we don't take exact notes on exactly what people say, is that maybe you write me a memo or write us a memo.
Sure.
Just so we, I think we call it memorialize, is that what we call it? So we put in writing.
Memorialize sounds sad.
I know, it does. I found it sort of a term I've never used. It's a new thing for me at the Met Council, but it makes it more permanent.
Sure.
So as we, I'm interested as chair in being able to address your concerns, at least talk about some of your concerns, right? And if we don't keep those somewhere, we're not going to know what they are. And so I know different people that have been involved in different organizations do these in different ways. I will say when I was a mayor, we did keep lists because you just don't want this to go into a vacuum, right? So thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, my next in line, great. Thank you. I would like to ask about the bus replacement services that you're proposing. I know when we had a discussion the last time, there was a discussion about the bus number 16 that the light rail replaced. Is there a plan to make the bus service similar to what the number 16 was? And, what are the details on that as far as servicing the bus riders?
Mr. Koister.
Councilmember Chambliss, right now we're trying to answer those questions. I think the starting point is that we want to be sure to replace the rail service that's being that's being eliminated between 2 and 4. I think that then the starting point is that the replacement stops would be near those shelters. But we are asking the question that you're asking in some ways, not necessarily replicating the 16, but saying, are there other stops that we might need to make along the way in order to make it a more meaningful service that actually can be a better service? We had one of the reasons we're calling it a pilot is because we've had so few riders using it for destination in our survey. We're not sure what exactly the rider demands are that we can expect. It's a difficult situation on the train between the hours of 2 and 4, and we may have a growth in ridership with a bus service. We also can get a better sense of where, if there are even a limited number of riders, where those convenience stops might be for those riders. So I think I understand the point of your question about 16 had many more stops. I think,
Yes.
and I'm not committing that we're going to duplicate 16. I'm committing that we're going to at least replace the service, and I think we can do a little more than that as we look at that. And I think that's something that we have some time to look at more specifically, because as the implementation of this would not occur until August 17th.
Okay, if I may have another
Councilwoman.
question? Okay, and we heard that there was opposition and concern to this proposed adjustment update. And we also heard from other council members today about engagement and involvement of more stakeholders. We talked about the Equity Advisory Committee being involved, community members being involved, of course, us as council members being involved. But I would like for us to be involved in looking at the detailed pilot plan that is going to be proposed, because the next steps doesn't lay out all the details of how it's going to be executed.
Mr. Korster, I'm not sure, have you thought about that, sort of when that plan might be
Madam
ready?
Chair, we'd be happy to to share with you what plans we think would be the best plan for the alternative bus service. We'd be happy to report back on what those I know you're interested in that and what those are.
The full plan,
Pardon me?
the full plan, the full pilot plan.
Of the bus service.
Yeah, of the adjustment update.
So that we know how many people are coming, and I guess, and I'm not sure if this is
I
getting
think
to
I'm
your point.
misunderstanding the question.
Okay.
That's why I look
The
bewildered.
full
not to
plan
get it,
of
but-
our next steps.
Okay.
And maybe having that more detailed out and having the stakeholders involved, including council members and some of our advisory committees and community members.
Well, with respect to the decision on the change in service hours, that decision is going to be made soon, and that decision has to be made before the 28th, because that is our last date to make the decision in order for it to be a part of a PIC that is driven by our labor contracts that would be in effect for the 17th. In terms of the replacement service and in terms of the plans with respect to working with the homeless design team, the Interagency Council on Homelessness, and the work we're doing on that, we would be glad to come back with you on those elements, as we would be glad to come back with you on elements with respect to the alternative bus service that we would be putting together. I need to check with staff about how detailed we have to be in the May PIC in terms of what stops, but I think there's probably some play that we can have in what stops are finally determined, as long as we have the general route down. We are working under timelines that are really based on labor contracts and how we can get this done. And then the other timeline we're working under is we want to get started right away, because the work about connecting people to other services and getting the contracts finished with Wilder and getting approval for the funding for the case managers it needs to get done now in order to have meaning meaningful time to implement those services.
Follow on?
Thank you. I look forward to seeing the plan.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think Ramsey County, one of the commissioners told me is they just want to make sure, particularly in regards to work, people are working at the airport and that they don't miss their shifts, right? And so I know I don't know how we figure that out, let alone putting someone on there that says, there's another survey about where you go and what times you need to be there. And so that we're making sure we're meeting those needs. He feels that if we potentially jeopardize someone's job. And I'm thinking we're not going to, right? But that's the kind of concerns I hear out there too, is sort of making sure, particularly amongst other things, that people get to work on time. So that's where we have to, what time do they need to get on and how long is the bus compared to the light rail and, all that kind of stuff. But you guys are going to figure, so we'll just need to figure that out.
Madam Chair, if I could respond to that,
Mr. Koister.
under the plan to provide alternative bus service, that is intended to take care of the travel demands of people going to and from work and people going to and from school, which there are very few of, if you would imagine that. I mean, there could be people coming from labs or libraries or so forth, or people going shopping, which there's very little of, but there can be people using all-night pharmacies, laundromats, those sorts of things. That should take care of that. And of course, the airport service isn't changing because that's Blue Line. And I guess to the extent that, so I can't imagine to the extent that Green Line would not, during our hours of service, would not connect to a Blue Line service that would get them to an airport. So I think we have that covered as well. And we're also trying to cover in a meaningful way the concern over the placement of people who are using shelter using transit as shelter. They're already displaced on transit, and so we're working hard to work closely with others to address those concerns. What we're falling short of saying is that transit's an appropriate place to continue to provide shelter services.
Okay, Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, thanks for having Ms. Tenbrook and Mr. Koister present together. And I think this really illustrates for us that as we consider the proposed Green Line hours adjustment, there needs to be, and we're doing this, and we're participating in solutions in this other way. And I want to commend Ms. Tenbrook for the work that she's doing. And I was recruited into the work of the Unsheltered Homelessness Design Work Group at the end of last summer, beginning of last fall, with incredible growth of the homelessness encampment at Franklin and Hiawatha. And so I've been participating in that, more wearing the community hat of leadership of the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, which is a leadership forum of about 36 Native organizations throughout the Metro. A lot of them are service organizations. Mine, NACD, Native American Community Development Institute, is not a service organization, but we act as an intermediary convener. And so and it's been really intense work. And I will say, in my activist and political and community career, I have been part of hundreds, possibly thousands of policy development processes. This is really the most satisfying one I've ever been part of, in part because of the speed and urgency of the work, and especially the incredible growth of the encampment that brought a lot of community concern and public concern to the issue. Another part is the involvement of lived experience consultants, homeless people that are brought to that are part of the conversation, that are supported in the conversation. It has had a profound effect on the work of the design work group, and I think also what makes it most satisfying is that suddenly an entire system, sort of our unsheltered homelessness care system, has come together with a willingness to reform and to change and to do better. And so that's public sector, private sector, philanthropy, service providers are all around this table, all expressing a willingness to do things differently. And I've just never seen anything like that. And there are people who have been working around these issues for their entire careers that are saying that over and over again. I've never seen anything like this, where a whole system has come together to change. And so there's just all kinds of opportunity here and at Met Council, as was pointed out, we don't really do this. We don't take care of homeless people and or those experiencing homelessness, and especially people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. But I think what we're learning now is, as a region, we need to figure out a model where we all are playing the parts that we can play. And because of the imminent decision about the Green Line service, and because of the impact it may have on some people, the spotlight's going to be on us for a bit here. And what are we going to do? And part of my concern is, as the systemic change starts to shape up, and we're obviously looking some ways out into the future, because we'll need to be deploying public resources, private sector resources, doing systems change. And a big part of my concern is, what are we going to do this summer? And right now, it looks like summer 2019 is going to look exactly like summer 2018. Not a lot has really changed. And again, I would point out that with this higher profile decision coming out of Met Council, coming out of Metro Transit, we have an opportunity to at least be part of whatever the crisis response, the immediate response, the emergency response looks like in 2018. And so as we talk about the resources that we may be redirecting or redeploying, outreach resources, I think that's a good role for us to assume. And one of the things we'll need to be able to explain in a transparent way is, we're using additional outreach resources to do X, to get people to shelter, to get people the support they need. Because one of the things I've learned through my involvement with the design work group is that it's not just about shelter, it's about eliminating barriers, it's about co-locating the support that people need to even stay in shelter, let alone transition into a permanent housing situation. And though these are questions that will come up if we make these changes, and we will need to be prepared to respond. And I will say, one of the things that the organization I work for, my day job at Native American Community Development Institute, has been funded to engage this community, the unsheltered Native people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And we're just learning incredible and profound things from this direct engagement of the community. And one of the things that we've learned is, shelter and support, of course, are two pillars of what people experiencing homelessness need, but healing and health is also the keystone of what people are seeking. And nobody does that. I mean, I'll just point that out. Nobody in the model is really doing that now. And so as we struggle to determine sustainable regional solutions, what's the role of the Met Council? And I think that we'll need to evolve and possibly think of this in a different way, because we are 7 counties. We all have borders that all create barriers within the system to having it work and having it serve the people that we're trying to do or trying to serve. And I guess I would close with, one of the things that we learned through the encampment response, we're learning through engaging the Native unsheltered population, is who is providing the outreach and the support and the services matters. And one of the things Mr. Christian is looking at the survey data, and thanks for doing that. And just remember through that, we were surveying the community at the camp all the time. And the difference between the quality of the data that a Native person administering a survey tool would gather and a non-Native person was immense. It could have been two different populations being surveyed. And we've also learned that with the outreach, the difference in effectiveness between Native people engaging Native people in outreach is immense, and it matters. And so that we're keeping that in our mind as we're trying to reach the demographics that you laid out, Mr. Koister, from the survey data. And I know Native people aren't the only people disproportionately represented in our unsheltered homeless population. But the likelihood that Ms. Tambrook highlighted, a Native person is 27 times more likely than the general population to be unsheltered in our region. That shows me, as we talk about equity and trying to create a more equitable region, that's a gross inequity. And so if we can close that gap some, we will be working toward a more equitable region. And so I want us to be prepared if we make this service change to say we're doing this and we're doing this, and this to support this population.
Thank you. I would just say from my observation, in my time, I've only been here since January, but our staff is spending a lot of time on this, particularly Meredith is, as the regional administrator, working with these groups. And you know, it's on our radar screen. I remember you asking me this question when you were brand new. What are we going to do as the regional gatherer, you know, as a regional organization? And so I think that's evolved quite a bit actually in the last couple months. I was going to ask Ms. Tenbrook if she could comment on this summer. Are things coming together? What do you see as the future? And you know what our part in this is. I don't think I can, it's not firm, right? So I don't think we can talk a lot about exactly our role. But
Maybe we want to
yeah,
Kathy
Kathy,
talk a
if you
little more
can talk.
first.
Well, I'll just say it's not fully baked, but the process is underway to figure out what, very much to Councilmember Lilligren's point, what the urgent acceleration process can be. And there are multiple pieces, as you can imagine, everything from increasing outreach to increasing flexible resources that outreach can use to quickly get people out of harm's way, you know, into a motel if they need it, or into some other safe place other than the streets, you know, those kinds of quick one-time resources. There's discussion around co-locating some outreach and health providers and mental health providers and healing providers together to try to figure out how we can better serve people who are utilizing transit, actually literally having warm handoff from the HAT team to a co-located service area where we can serve people better. Making, I think, like Councilmember Lilligren said, we know that shelter by itself is, just opening up a certain number of beds isn't enough. It's about making sure that those beds work for people who are experiencing homelessness outside. And so it's really a very person-centered, housing-first approach. And what we have done with veterans teaches us a lot in terms of literally knowing each person by name, what they need, what will work for them, what won't work for them. Do they have possessions and partners and pets? And that's why they're not able to go into the emergency system that we've already built. So really listening to people and understanding what they need. So a lot of, I think what we're going to need this summer is people power. We're going to need outreach, we're going to need case managers, and we're going to need to make sure we have the capacity in our emergency response system, and that capacity is built around those people's needs, not just built and take it or leave it, which is, I think, a little bit of how we've ended up where we are in this situation. So we need to make sure it really works for people. So there's multiple pieces to that. The other thing that I think is really compelling and is the idea of there are some opportunities in our community that could be stood up pretty quickly, that could provide permanent housing for people and connect people to supports. But sometimes there's often a gap, a capital gap in the ability to purchase the building, or something needs some kind of renovation that, bonding dollars that we have, and of course that are on the table at the legislative session right now, are so critical in building permanent supportive housing. But those, of course, take some years to get online. What is our existing opportunity in the community where we could use small amounts of capital in a really flexible way to get some units online? And we've seen that happen with some community partners being very creative and strategic. We just don't have the flexible pool of capital to do that. So we want to build something like that in the really short term that can be used as one-time infusion of getting more housing online as well.
So we come into that.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, council members, I think I am prepared this is your first budget process for many of you, but what you'll be seeing in the coming months is the regional administrator's recommended budget to the council. You'll see that go through your committees and then roll up to the council here, where we'll adopt a preliminary budget and preliminary levy in August, followed by a public comment draft in October, and a final budget in December. I am preparing to recommend in that budget that the council dedicate $1 million or more to this permanent supportive housing effort as sort of spark funding to get that going. It would come out of your general purposes levy. This council would need to make some decisions about, is that the way you want to spend very limited general purpose levy dollars? Given the attention and the need, my suspicion is that is of interest to this council. We may also bring forward a budget amendment in the coming months to provide some funding in advance of 2020, because obviously our budget that you'll hear this summer doesn't actually happen until January, and so you may see something from us in the coming months. But we are working with Kathy and her team to look at what would that look like? How would that money best be used? Should it go through our LCA program? Should it be conveyed to Minnesota Housing? How would we go about distributing that money in an expeditious and appropriate way for public dollars so that we could advance that cause fairly quickly? The council certainly is in the role of providing some seed funding like we do with LCA. We leverage a lot of dollars by providing our Livable Communities Act grants to build out affordable housing and other economic development needs of the region. And so this isn't out of scope for us. We're excited about that opportunity, and I think it could spark some sort of funding competition, maybe isn't the right word, but interest from our partners, maybe it is the right word, interest from our partners and philanthropy and others to compete and join the council. So we're excited about that opportunity. We're also just looking at some smaller opportunities. There's a landlord insurance pool, maybe isn't exactly the right word.
Risk mitigation funding that could be utilized for this effort.
Right. So we're looking at whether the council can contribute to that. Obviously, Terry Smith, who's sitting in the audience, made you aware of the 89 vouchers the council has to try to provide independent living for those who are on transit, sheltering on transit. We know everyone is ready for housing. Not everyone is ready for independent living. And so we were working with our county partners to move some folks who maybe have been sheltering on transit into shelter at the county and move some of the longest term shelter users out of shelter into that independent living situation that our voucher provides. Our HRA is looking at other things I believe they reviewed with you, including preferences within our vouchers as Section 8 and other vouchers become available. Can that preference be to individuals experiencing homelessness, families experiencing homelessness? How do we look at those? And so we're looking at that both sort of policy change piece as well as small dollar pieces of funding, and small as in, it might be 20 or 50,000, and big dollar in terms of $1 million or more to spark permanent supportive housing kind of funding.
So I wanted you to know that because it's, as much as it's kind of messy, right? They talk about, particularly the legislature, policymaking is like making sausage, right? So it's not a clean, great process all the time. And this is a crisis we are dealing with. So we are doing our best, but I think in that solution, coming up with a significant amount of money where the Metropolitan Council will be contributing to that. Now, I understand this might be specialized type housing. They're looking for, say, a building that might have sort of classrooms in it, and they could, different populations that want to stay together, whether it's families, older people, different ethnicities, just to help people that are afraid of, particularly the big shelters. And I'm just saying that's been talked about. So I'm much more on the outside, but talking with Commissioner Ho on a regular level, and we would want to make sure whatever the funding goes to, obviously it's meeting a need. And so there's a lot of work being done, and I just want to make sure you all know, in the midst of the churning and the tough times that we have to go through of making policies and changing things, it is in the polishing that the diamond is found, right? And so and I suspect it's going to be potentially harder before it becomes easier as we go through this summer. I mean, I think that's very eloquent description of what this is going to be like, and then we can help contribute to that. So we have Councilmember Lee, Sterner, Gonzalez, Johnson, Atlas, Ingebrigtsen, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I thought I saw Howie there, but I acknowledge that our communications team is in the room, but this might be more of a question for the chair and for Meredith, and it might be more rhetorical too, but I just assume that everyone read the op-ed that came out last night, was published this morning, and if you haven't, you should. It echoed some of the. It was a thoughtful and articulate op-ed. I thought, and it echoed some of the sentiments that the local constituents and officials kind of echoed when they talked to me about this issue. And Chris Rutson and I, we represent the whole of St. Paul, and so this will have a huge impact on the city of St. Paul. And I'm just wondering, as council members Alice Ingebrigtsen and Lilligren said earlier, being more transparent going forward, will we have a plan to, maybe we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of responding to every op-ed, but if we're going to be in the spotlight, if the die is cast, then why don't we say something or make it more public and have more transparency going forward, so that the community feels more engaged and involved. And is there a tactical advantage to just announce today or tomorrow that we were going to close it anyway, and might pressure the legislature to help with the sense of urgency in the background of in the context of our meeting yesterday with the Board of Ramsey County Commissioners.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Sterner.
Well, thank you, Chair Slavic and Director Tenbrook. I just, you mentioned, and we've been talking around the table here more about like Minneapolis and St. Paul homelessness, and I'm just kind of wondering if you give me a sense of the rest of the region, either in percentages or numbers of how does the rest of the region go in homelessness statistics?
I just happen to have my most recent graph here, so I can tell you.
Thank you.
Well, I was doing a little math, and so across the whole state, at last count, there was about 7,200 people on a one-night point-in-time count in January. That's a minimum count. We know it's much higher than that, but we do a count every January to get our minimum trend line. And about 65% of all people throughout the state are in the 7-county metro area. And of the 7-county metro area, it's Hennepin and then Ramsey, and then what we call the suburban metro counties would be, kind of the third highest number of the three. So it is predominantly in the metro, but it is an issue that impacts all regions of the state, and in fact is just often much harder to identify in some of the greater Minnesota areas as well.
Okay. Right, Chair Slavic and Director Van Brook. The other one is, I know she had these great programs with veterans and women with children. Are there, like, I know I'm from Dakota County, we seem like we have a big issue with teen homelessness. I wonder about teen and felons getting out of prison and addicts, mental and physical disabilities. If there's some programs you're working on those as well.
Yeah, actually, the Interagency Council on Homelessness has a broad scope of its work all across the state and for multiple populations. And so we have strategies and efforts focused on young people who are experiencing homelessness by themselves, disconnected from their from families. And we have, focus on chronic people with disabilities who've been homeless a long period of time, veterans. So different populations have very specific strategies and focus areas and partnerships built to address those needs. One of the biggest challenges for sure is, and wanted to highlight it since you also mentioned it, is trying to prevent homelessness when people are exiting public institutions like the correction system, like foster care, some of those institutions where we have an opportunity, we're touching folks at this important moment of transition in their lives, but the housing availability and the barriers to getting into that housing are so high that people are exiting then to our homeless system, to our homeless response system. So one of our strategies as an interagency council is to try to move upstream, especially with the commissioners of these 11 different council agencies working together to identify every possible way we can do stronger planning and focus on the folks transitioning out of institutional care into the community. So that is one of the pieces of work that we do as well. But once again, I think so much of this, of course, is the foundation of everything we're trying to do has to do with housing. And if we don't have housing that's affordable and housing that's available and vacancy rates that are tight and landlords not willing to rent to people who have a criminal history or some other issue in their past, then we're going to continue to bump up against a really challenging stage in people's lives.
Okay, and just one more, and then this is for Mr. Koistra. So I'm wondering is we have like the green line where we have this 2-hour issue, but the rest of the system, between BRT and other light rail, can you give me a sense of what kind of downtime the rest of the 7-county region has for transportation?
Mr. Koistra?
Madam Chair, Council Member, the Green Line hours are similar to the Blue Line hours in terms of light rail transit. They are light Blue Line, what the proposed Green Line hours are. The Blue Line is also has downtime on weekdays and essentially provides a full service on weekends. With respect to the other A lines, I think I want to get you accurate information, so I want to follow up with you on terms of what the specific hours of operation and when they specifically halt. But I know it's not 24-hour service, and we do have some lines that are we call OWL service that are overnight. So it really depends, and I can give you more complete information, not from the top of my head, but to ask the people whose business is to make those schedules.
Real good, like
And
the red light
I'll
as
commit
well.
to
then.
getting back to
Okay.
you on that.
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be brief. And just a quick comment on the Equity Advisory Committee, and I think Mr. Koistra was very accurate, indicating that there was a lot of opposition to this process. I think part of the opposition, in my estimation, was because the folks didn't feel consulted early enough in the process. Not so much about the decision itself, although that was indeed spoken against, but just briefly to echo what was said here before about making sure that we engage the community, especially the Equity Advisory Committee, on the decisions that we're going to make at an earlier stage of the process, so they have an opportunity to offer meaningful input. And just a quick question to Ms. Tenbrook. My past life, I was a public assistance worker in Blue Earth County and in Mankato. One of the things that was standard practice back in the early 90s was if we had a single, usually male, with a chemical dependency or criminal record that came to our office to request public assistance, the first thing that we would do is offer them a bus fare to come to the cities. So the county didn't have to spend the money and the time and the effort to try to work with a very difficult case or a very difficult type of population and just send the folks up to the cities. So my question is that still an issue? Do we see folks from greater Minnesota being sent here to the Twin Cities, to the metro area, so the outstate areas don't have to invest on the effort to address their situations? And is that something that we capture on our surveys? Do we ask folks, for example, were you born or raised, or how long have you lived in the metro area? Perhaps that can give us an idea if that's a population that is coming to the Twin Cities as opposed to having grown up or having more of a long-term presence here. And quickly, one of the reasons why I saw those folks then coming back to Mankato many times is because when they got here, they didn't have any family or support services, so they will fall back into the same old behaviors and still be homeless. Mm-hmm. And then they will go back to Blue Earth County, and then we will buy them another bus ticket. Mm-hmm. So nobody was really addressing the issue. They were simply passing the quote-unquote problem here to the Twin Cities. Mm-hmm. So again, is that something that we're capturing, that kind of population? And number two, is that a real problem still 20 plus years later? Thank you.
Ms. Stenberg.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilmember. I think I would say this. I've been doing this work for about 25 years, 27 years. I used to do direct service and then worked at various counties and various levels of government. And I've certainly heard that even from various states. I remember when I was working for a county commissioner in Hennepin County, I got a call from somebody in the mayor's office in Denver, Colorado, and they said, stop sending us, people experiencing homelessness from your city. And I didn't know what he was even talking about. So people certainly move, and they're moving around to try to get connected to where the resources are. I think that's why this conversation is so important, that we're having a regional conversation about people unsheltered in the metro area, because it really is a metro area problem. Now, most of the folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness are being served primarily in Hennepin and Ramsey, and I think that has a lot to do with that's where the services are more likely available. I don't know, to be really direct about your question, if how many of those folks are from those other counties. I certainly, when I talk to my colleagues in Ramsey and Hennepin, they will say we certainly serve people from all over the region and all over the state. But I also think this gets back to really listening to people and what they want, because I think your last point about people aren't going to succeed if they aren't surrounded, if they're not in a place that is where they want to be in community and where they want to be in that area. So I would say I don't think we typically see lots and lots of people from greater Minnesota wanting to come to the metro area to get connected to resources. Some of them might come for a little while, but it's not where they want to stay. Typically they want to be where their community is. The last thing I would just say, we do on the Wilder survey that's done every 3 years in October, they do ask the question, how long have you been in Minnesota? And if you've been there, I can't remember don't quote me on these questions, they would be upset with me, but something around like, if you've been here for less than 2 years, what brought you to Minnesota? And the majority of folks who are surveyed in the Wilder survey who are experiencing homelessness are either from Minnesota or they have family connections to Minnesota. So even though, yes, some people will come from another city or another location to get connected or find better schools like the rest of us do, we travel to do those things for our families. Truly, the majority of folks that Wilder survey has identified pretty consistently over their surveys are this is their home. This is the place they grew up, where they have family or some connection to Minnesota that makes this why they're here. So I don't know if I'm fully answering your question. I don't know if I know the answer exactly about I'm dismayed to hear a little bit about the bus tickets from Blue Earth, but I'm not surprised either.
Thanks.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. That was a good transition to my question. So I really am interested in us contracting with Wilder to analyze existing data on people using transit as shelter. That fascinates me, and I want to know what are we going to do with that. I'm a person who, data is great, but then what do we do, and what are the goals? And if we're going to put forward some funding, again, what are the goals? So data is good to help you kind of level set and know what you're trying, what you're dealing with, and then what are the strategies to get to the goals. So that I'd be interested in learning more about, and to a lot of the discussion taking place. Well, first of all, again, that there's research out there that hasn't been analyzed on this. If that was the statement, that's kind of puzzling to me. So it's good that we're going to get on it. But also, this might be a way to engage some community into this as well, because specifically our issue is around unsheltered people on transit. So if we're going to do more digging on this, maybe there are organizations and communities out there that could come in, engage with us, because I would imagine that might lead to some other things that we would be doing. And early engagement, as we all know, is better, your trust building. And while we might not always agree on the outcomes, at least we agree that we've been part of the process. And so, as we work through this, and not for tonight, but I'd like to know, on the timing of this, who are we going to share the data with? And just, again, how we set up goals and system support around whatever we're going to do with it. So I think it's good that we're committing resources to that and maybe some other resources, but again, systems alignment, engagement, and ultimately goals within what we can control, but then in partnership with other agencies. Those are just things that I've heard tonight that interest me, and I'd like to learn more about it as we move along.
And Chair, just one comment about the data really quickly, if I might. Just to be really clear too, I think what we'll learn from Wilder, that's data that was collected in October of 2018, it's going to give us a really good idea about the the general needs, demographics, and focus of how we do the work on the transit system, I think, with new housing case managers and all of that. It will not be person by person identifiable data that helps us really target exactly what we do in a person-centered way. However, I think we need that sort of baseline to make sure we're putting the right things in place to start. But what we've learned with our veteran work is that as we're doing that, and what we're learning from your HAT team and others who know folks very, very well who are riding transit, is that they do know some of those individual specific needs and opportunities that we should be seizing. So we'll be both understanding the big picture, but we'll be diving into the person-centered response to everybody that we're interacting with on the transit as well, just to be clear.
Thank you, Councilmember.
And just a brief follow-up, I think that's great because, if we can, we can't always anticipate what the issues or problems will be out there, but if we can get ahead of it with data that's already sitting out there that, could we have tapped into this sooner? I don't know. But anything that we can do to get a handle on it so that we're not, in crisis and reacting, but to be proactive, I'd like to really make sure we do our best at that.
Mr. Coister.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to say I agree that we have to be purposeful in that, and that's why we're going to rely a lot on the professionals in dealing who are dealing with the development of these services to identify that. It's not just us telling Wilder what to look at. We need to have Kathy tell us what to tell Wilder to look at, and her staff and the people that she works with. In terms of why it hasn't been looked at before, my understanding is Wilder has so much funding. They do what they can with their surveys, and they collect a great wealth of data, but they don't have funding available to look at that data in every which way. So this is why they said, we've got data, help us dig deeper into it rather than survey again. So I think this is a good example of why it's good to have the data available, and we can be purposeful with it as these kinds of issues come up.
Yeah, and just also be clear, Madam Chair, this is recently released data. It's actually, we just in April was when Wilder actually published their general data. So this is our first chance to dig deeper.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think you have to leave early for another meeting, so thank you. We have two more, Councilmember Alice Ingerson and then Councilmember Cummings. If you want to get on the list, make sure you get on, and we'll start to not necessarily wind up, but as people have, there's the big blossoms of hope.
Yeah, relighting.
Yeah, relighting, which is an exciting thing, and I know many people have other meetings. So, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I'll be brief. One more thing for memorialization. Is that what? Yeah. Okay. That's the thing we're doing here. I think one of the pieces, and I appreciate Councilmember Gonzalez speaking to this, in our nominating work for the EAC, we met with 46-ish amazing individuals, and were able to choose place 4. We already and was able to meet a number of wonderful people who are investing their time in the Equity Advisory Committee. What I hope we can get to for this work and for other work going forward also is a clear process of how we're engaging the EAC and hearing reports on what recommendations they give as a part of this. It'd be very helpful to hear not just they didn't like it, but what I'm hoping we're asking, not just if they if it is a yes, no vote, that's good to know too, but also if they have recommendations or suggestions or ideas, things like that, it would be helpful to hear that information. I also hope that we are shifting, if we're asking them to give feedback on things that were decisions already made on, that we're shifting so that we're asking them to give feedback in a time where their input actually can influence what we're doing, and that they're aware of that too, so that they're putting things on their agenda that they can influence and not spending time because I don't want us to be in a position where we're looking like we're checking a box, that we're taking something to them. It's a quick way to ensure the community will not be supportive of what we're doing. It's definitely a quick way not to respect and honor their time and expertise. We had some phenomenal people. We couldn't even choose. And we're really trying to think about how do we engage them in the work they're doing. Some amazing demographers, all kinds of amazing people. People who open up their homes to people in their community and start food shelves. I mean, just really stunning people. So I appreciate Councilmember Gonzalez gave us some idea, but it'd really be great to have just a practice that we employ when we take things to the EC. What's the report back? Because that's what we're hoping to get from them. And I know we have a number of members who sit on that as well.
So just to let you know, I have emailed all the chairs, and we're looking at forming an executive committee, and so we will meet and talk about these issues because we need to get some cohesion, and that the EAC has a work plan that they come up with and they work through, and then their work will likely, we're having in the middle of this discussion, be taken to the different committees as it comes up and working through it that way. So we're figuring it out again. It's not always the cleanest process, but we do need to, we do have a process we're talking about. We're talking with the chairs. All know I have written them and asked them their thoughts on such a process. And yes, we got to figure out the engagement piece, right? And how we work through that. And I know that there's staff here that they also are staffed by staff, so we're trying to take all that input. Is Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Fredson.
I would like to reiterate that it's really helpful to have you both here co-presenting. It really helps with cohesion and understanding of the issue and the depth of the problem and the challenges. Clearly, using transit as shelter isn't dignified. It's not healthy. It's not respectful. It kind of normalizes the problem, and that is not acceptable. I think the magnitude of homelessness in the Metro achieved a lot of public visibility and attention last year, mainly through the large encampments, and provided a clear focal point for public understanding of the scale and the scope of the issue, and it's harder to appreciate that when the problem is unseen. And I think that resulted in substantial collaborative effort, innovative approach, and new investment. In one of the things that I read, perhaps Ms. Tenbrook, it might have been from the Interagency Council report, that's got wonderful information in it, but it said political will and public awareness represent the most foundational component for an effective regional approach. So my two questions, I guess, are how are we engaging the general community again now? And how will we continue to do that going forward? We've had a lot of discussion about particular groups and the government and what's going on in the 11 groups that are represented on the Interagency Council, and it's all very valuable. I think we need to have general public understanding of the scope and their role in addressing this. So I would ask you how we might continue that and capitalize on that. And then I'm curious too, we haven't heard very much about the business community and their role. Are they at the table? Are they adequately at the table? What is their role? And are there other things that we can do with respect to the business community and drawing them in? Because clearly they're an important component as well.
Great. Madam Chair. Councilmember Cummings, thank you. Good questions. I'll start with the second one, if I could, just because it's fresh in my mind. So when the design team, the Unsheltered Homelessness design team, prepared those recommendations about a systems response, they presented it to the public sector leadership group, which I mentioned already. They are now presenting the same set of recommendations and focus to a group of philanthropic and business leaders on May 28th. And they're going to present, here's what we see as the opportunity to create the system that we need. Intentionally kind of had that a little later than the public sector group because I think it would be really helpful for them to see where the public sector is stepping up, but also where we're still having gaps in the ways, I think, the way philanthropy or business can help fill some of those gaps or leverage further effort. I think what Regional Administrator Bettis mentioned about that seed pool potentially is a really interesting opportunity to bring to them for a one-time investment, sort of a friendly competition and investing in this pool of resource that could open up more low barrier housing opportunities for exactly the folks we're talking about is one of the things that we want to talk about on that day. So yes, so they are starting to be engaged. I would very much welcome anybody's assistance in getting additional business leaders in particular to that conversation or to other conversations that I'd be happy to have with them. If you have some connections and opportunities there. It's from 1 to 3 on May 28th at the Otto Bremer Foundation. And I would love to be able to send them additional information about that because I think it's a great opportunity. It doesn't have to be the only opportunity, but it's certainly one of them. And to your first point, that's another very good question. I mean, I think community engagement and political will often go really hand in hand, of course. And I think, engaging with our faith communities and broader communities about the work that's happening is a really important part of this. To be very, very honest with you, in my little team of 3 people, I'm not quite sure how we take that on. So I think, once again, I want to offer if people have ideas of where members of our design team, other partners can go and speak to groups who could really take that information and share it more broadly. I think that's part of the key. Certainly media and any kind of opportunities we get to educate the broader community about what's possible and that actually ending homelessness is possible, and we've seen it happen in certainly happen for people and individuals and family, but we've also seen it really take shape for entire groups of people. We have not hit that mark on the work that we're trying to do here, and I think we need some broader community engagement to do that because I think that's how we move. Ensure that folks at the legislature and otherwise really understand the importance of those housing dollars in this work as well. So I welcome your advice and guidance and other community partners to be involved in helping us do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fredson.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentations and your work for the expanded bus service and for bringing on Wilder. I share other council members' comments related to process and partnership, specifically related to the Green Line hours adjustment. I would feel more comfortable if I felt there was and I don't know if this is a question for the chair or for Wes, but there was a commitment that Green Line hours wouldn't be, Green Line LRT hours wouldn't be reduced further in the future. I know that when Green Line started, there was a commitment that this would be a 24-hour line, and I know it still is 3 nights of the week. But I guess my concern that I voiced at Equity Advisory Committee and privately, and I think here too, but is that 2 years from now or 4 years from now, we would go from 22 hours to 20 hours or 18 hours. Now that Green Line is being expanded to through Southwest Corridor, that this would sort of become a 9 to 5 line. So, and I know if this was the planning commissioner at the city of St. Paul, I would have the opportunity to write a resolution. We don't really operate that way, and so what is the process or mechanism by which that sort of is discussed and committed or not committed?
I am not exactly sure myself. Meredith, Wes, would like to.
Well, I'll just respond from where I sit on this, and that is that there's not any discussions going on. This isn't intended to be incremental. This was intended to be a solution to a maintenance problem, and in some ways a problem safety on the lines, but started with maintenance discussion, and there's no intent to go further. I don't know that the general manager would be responsible for me to say that we shall never do this or this on any line, because we have people doing that analysis all the time on different lines, and I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. But I can say honestly to you that there is absolutely no discussion of going for the 2-hour change that we've discussed, and that's probably as far as I can go, because the world changes over time.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. And we have Councilmember Bento and then Wolf. Bento?
Madam Chair, Kathy, I'm really glad you mentioned the faith community. For 5 years, I worked for a Catholic church here in downtown St. Paul that for hundreds of years has played a critical role in social services and continues to, and the homeless issue is very much part of their effort. And I'm aware that there is a downtown block group that is in the best way to describe it is St. Joe's Hospital, Mickey's, XL, Travelers Corner of the city that meets on a fairly regular basis to address homeless issues. And I would imagine that there are other neighborhoods in St. Paul where those same types of block groups are getting together, perhaps even a similar kind of set of organizations in Minneapolis. And to the extent that we can reach out to those groups and make sure that we stay connected to them, I think that we can share good information to help address the issue. Just great potential.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the presentation from both of you, and I also appreciate Wes's response on the hours of the Green Line. Councilmember Ferguson spoke the last time we met about how the all-night service was a pilot initially, but we didn't do a very good job of letting people know that we were trying it out. Now we're finding out that our maintenance people can get electrocuted if we don't shut down the line at night, and that's a very significant safety issue. I want to make sure that we don't get those two things, since we're talking about them at the same time, that we don't get them too intertwined, because I've read so much in the media about that we're doing this to get rid of homeless people, and clearly we're making huge efforts to deal with the problem, but we also need to be very clear on the safety of our workers and others that are riding. I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Fredson's question. When one of the first things that I did when I became a council member, this was back in 2010, I was the chair of the group that wrote the Transitway Guidelines for the region for different modes, how many riders you have to have a station, what the minimum hours are for different modes, and that sort of thing. So we do have a policy in place of what hours different modes need to have. Light rail has the longest of any of them because it is such a big investment. It better have a lot of riders over a long period of time, or we're making the wrong investment. But I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Koistra that we can't just make deals of this line gets, no matter what, this line gets more time or a certain amount of time, because all of this service costs a lot of money to run if it doesn't have riders. And we have to be able to respond. I mean, the legislature right now is fighting over what are we going to even have for operating funding for our transit system. And Metro Mobility gets funded first, light rail gets funded second, and our buses get funded last. So making a commitment that no matter what funding we have, light rail is going to run a certain number of hours would mean that we have to potentially cut very needed bus service to someplace else in order to make that commitment. So I trust that our planners will do a good job on making sure that we balance our operating expenses throughout the region based on ridership and not based on a political deal to give somebody assurance that they're going to get something. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that note, I know that Councilmember Cummings, I think, is going to send us all a memo or share the information she has about maintenance. And do you want to preview that at all, or
Sure. I had sent a list of questions. I agree that we don't want to lose sight of what the impetus is, which is repair and safety of workers and cleanup of the car and so forth. So I had sent a list of questions and gotten really concise answers from the Director of Rail Systems Maintenance through Mr. Koistra. And for me, it was really, really valuable information, and it's going to be, we'll pass it, see that everybody gets it. But we have two lines, the blue line and the green line, so we can do some comparisons as far as the ability to upkeep and maintain the two different lines, and the impact of having different decisions and how they're different and why they're different. And the safety factor, I think, is hugely important in all of this. So we'll get this out. For me, it was very clarifying, and I appreciate that your staff took the time to put this all down for much clearer understanding the issues around the downtime on the lines due to maintenance done or not done, and the additional cost due to delayed or inability to really do the upkeep, both on the cars and the line, and long-term, what that means in terms of the cost and the wear and tear and things like that. So I think that's, and again, of course, overarching all of this is the safety of the workers who have to go out and work on a live line and how dangerous that is. And I think I agree that we cannot lose sight of the fact that there are many, many considerations here for the maintenance, the upkeep, the investment that we're making, and primarily the safety of the workers. So we don't want to lose sight of that. So this will go out to everybody in the council. I appreciate your getting this information. It was very useful.
So we'll wrap up. I want to do a couple of thank yous. I want to thank especially Wes Koistra, our general manager of Metro Transit. He's new to his job. He started in January too, everybody. He was the regional administrator here and went over to Metro Transit, and it is a big, big job. And so I know that this has been something you probably didn't have on your work plan necessarily, but you've done a really good job of managing this. It's not perfect, and I will tell you, we are working on our processes here, and when issues like this do come up, on how to do them. So I will take accountability as the chair to say we can do better, I can do better, and we'll work at that. But I want to thank you for all your work on this. I know it's taken a lot of work, and it's going to take a little bit more as we get through this and as we work together to make the best decisions. And Kathy, thank you for your work. I mean, you and Commissioner Ho have been incredibly responsive. I know you've been engaging a lot with Meredith, again, with her time and spending a lot of time trying to think about how to really help. What can we do? And the Met Council, one good thing is we actually have some money. Well, wow, that's most places that is not even a possibility. So the idea that we can be part of a partnership financially, even, with people that are experts on how to do this is exciting, right? And thanks to all of you. I know this has been a struggle. This will not be our last struggle. This is what we do. Welcome to the Met Council, right? This is our job, to think about these tough issues. And I do know that there are people right here at this table that are chairs, maybe like the transportation chair, that are thinking about how to come up with a process or a work group or something that might start to address some of these things. So we're not going to just let this lie. We are going to start to take some action on things. And as we get into our retreat and we talk about what you all really want to do, we want to have outlets for these types of discussions and kind of directions and how to make some decisions. And so thanks to all of you. Thank you, Meredith, too, for your time. I know it's been daunting. It's been daunting for all of us, and that's something, you come into the Met Council, they'll say, what do you want to do as the chair, And it's a big decision to try to figure this out, but one thing is to provide services the best we can. Our LRT is a very important thing that we run, and it is a business, and we have to do this well, and we have hundreds of people working there and hundreds of operators on our buses, and we've got to think through all these issues. So this is the meaty decisions we deal with, and I thank you for a good discussion. And with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Chair.
It's been moved and seconded, a motion to adjourn. Is there any further discussion?
I know that people have things to do, but council member reports is something that's on here. And
gosh, so I always forget to get back to the count. That's right.
I have a few, but I'm going to be like 30 seconds or less.
So I will close out that part of the discussion and move to reports. So with the chair, briefly met with the legislature today, did our testimony. Judd is probably left at this point, but he did a great job answering questions. We are in kind of the fight of our lives up there at the legislature, so please contact your legislators. We met at the Ramsey County Board, as you heard. We went out to the Lake Elmo Park, which was fantastic, and we did our community disabilities presentation. So there's a lot of great work happening, and really appreciate how everybody's getting out there. Councilmember reports, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, then Lilligren.
I hope I don't steal anyone's thunder. I want to remember people that today or this month is Minnesota American Indian Month. There's tons of wonderful events. Is that on your list? Okay, I will not say more because it's on somebody else's list. It's also the beginning of Ramadan. So I want us just to, think about that. I was invited to an iftar, a breaking of the fast in Golden Valley. Super excited to be there with city council members and local leaders there on the 11th. It also this month brings in Hmong American Day on the 14th, and they'll be at the Capitol celebrating. So I hope we can get out and join some of our communities that maybe don't see us all that much by being present in space. Also visited with Lake Street Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago, who did some really exciting, promising practices where they diversified their team in order to better serve businesses, and also were able to, through a program focused on preventing recidivism, reduce crime on the street by 30%. Talk to me if you'd like to know more.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to remind the council members that May is Minnesota American Indian Month. It's the 50th anniversary of the month, so it's very significant. There are things going on all throughout the metro. For example, today in Burnsville, at Burnsville High School, right now, is the annual South of the River powwow. If folks are interested in seeing what's going on, you can go to indigenouscities.com. It has probably the most comprehensive calendar. Also, just to let council members know that it's the 50th anniversary of the founding of the American Indian Movement, which happened right here in the Twin Cities. Today at lunch, I was part of presenting a proclamation from Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, to Clyde Belcourt, declaring this Clyde Belcourt Day in the state of Minnesota. It's his birthday today. Aww. And the other thing to announce, which is the most important thing, it is also my mother's 90th birthday.
Oh, well, she's watching online or something.
Thank you.
Anything else? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. The trip last week to Lake Elmo was great because I finally got to visit the third county that is in my district, and I look forward to being with Mayor Fry next week when they unveil the Nice Ride electric bikes.
Yeah, excellent. Anything else? Okay, Regional Administrator.
Council members, I would just let you know that as we move through the police chief hiring, I heard from a number of you about the importance of community engagement. I concur fully that we need a police chief who understands our communities, is responsive to our communities, and credible with our communities. We are looking at bringing in finalists end of May, early June-ish, to engage with all of you and to engage with the community. I don't have that fully scoped out yet, but look for some holds on your calendars for potential dates. Obviously, we both have to negotiate council schedules, facility schedules, candidate schedules, community things, and so it's a balancing act. We won't get everybody, but we are looking forward to some community engagement before a final decision is made, so look for that forthcoming.
Okay, good. Very important. Councilmember Benfield.
Madam Chair, has a retreat date been set yet?
I thought I just did see it come on my calendar. Did I not? Or has it been set?
Yeah, go ahead. We have a date that had a plurality of folks that were available. We wanted to double check to make sure we got to kind of crucial abilities to
Okay. So I think maybe they're just putting holds on my calendar. It's hard for me to know. But yeah, I know you're all very busy people, and to be able to, if you need to take time off work, if you need to cancel things, we all need to know, right? Our general counsel.
Yes, I do have a report today. George Henry, if you could stand up. We have hired a new assistant general counsel. George was an 8th Circuit law clerk. He was in private practice and most recently at the city of Minneapolis, and we are very excited to have him. So I just wanted to bring him down and welcome him to the council.
Great.
Welcome, and hope you enjoyed your first council meeting. That was a good one. Yeah, welcome. Glad to have you. All right. Now there was a motion on the table, and it was seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we are adjourned.